presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
Evening, everybody. I gotta switch modes. Been in music mode all day. Hey, Chris. Hey, Timothy. Hey, Martin. Just got out of the recording studio a couple hours ago. So pour myself something nice. It's the first cool day of fall. Hey, Timothy, Judy, Susan, and Heather. 1 week till my parents get here, 8 days till Mystericon. I spent 2 hours laying down vocals, not all but one song. So I think it's a time.
The man with the torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable.
For some Z31, my favorite.
Hotel in Chicago. And first of all,
Hey, Jerry. Hey, Gene. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Cindy. It was also a really bad day to be Donald Trump yesterday. So I'm always glad that I'm not him, but first, the New York Attorney General finally smacks him down for years and years of fraud. Oh yeah, there should be a title card, huh? It's good. It says the tour begins at. Yeah, then then the whole thing with the 11th Circuit. It was a bad day for him. So there is a title card. I thought about there being a title card. I can make one just by thinking about it. Hey, Ann. Glad to hear that. Hey, Tom. Hey, Laura. What a day all around. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Georgia. Hey, Ann. I got one song I didn't manage to record in the theater, in the studio today. So do I just do that in a subpar booth? Hey, Aviva. Evening, Sarah. Hey, Vicky. Richardsonian Romanesque, very good. No, that's by Henry Ives Cobb. Yeah, pleasantly chilly out today, thank goodness. So how instead of the title card, I'll show you my album cover. There we go. That's the album I've been working on. That's my art project of the month that I'm now scrambling to finish before the busy season really gets going in earnest. Z31. Tasting note is toasted marshmallow. It's a Jepson single barrel offering. Hey, Gina. Now, Heather, you're not wrong. This is Henry Ives Cobb kind of aping Henry Hobson Richardson. Am I on YouTube tonight? I should be. I'm going to check that box. It says that I am. Well, I've got 11 people watching on YouTube. 11 of them! There's always a lot more people on the Facebook. Evening, Katie. Hey, Donna. Hey, Sherry in Seattle. Hey, Brooklyn. Hey, Julianne. Hey, Pamela. And in the South. I believe that went to Henry Ives Cobb, yeah. Hey, Eileen. Hey, Ellen. Well, Mom, are you spelling my last name right? The Potter Apartments. That's a neighborhood up from where we are here. Yeah, I think I have seen those. They're kind of near them. There's some that were built. There's some that were built for Potter Palmer, but he only lived there briefly. Or he lived there briefly, but they weren't built for him. I'd have to double check. I wonder if it's to do with O.W. Potter. Yeah, Sean, hello. Megan, you do you. Hey, Karen. With all my heart, all the while and wherefore. It's now been 2 weeks since my COVID booster, so I ought to be in good shape. Sal, I'd have to look that one up about the priest in Cicero who was John Paul's bodyguard. I know that could be tricky. Anytime I do something related to Catholicism, you get weird letters. Not that they disapprove of me talking about it. It's just you get these people who are like, you couldn't really say they were Catholic because it's like Catholic adjacent stuff that they're talking about, stuff that is not actually Catholic dogma, but it gets into like weird, like swearing the Pope had to bless each nail of a building because of vampires. Phoenix, I too like it cold. I know you're gonna stay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome along. Hi, Gene, over on YouTube. The Gorilla, Sal. I will look that up. It does sound interesting. Could always use it for like a find a grave or something. Speaking of, I have no idea where I'm doing that. Hey, Kevin. Glad to have you. Oh yeah, you get the Catholic adjacents, the trad Catholics who just hang out on Twitter bashing everybody else, and you don't want to get them started on Jewish Twitter. Or you don't want to get them started on much. Like, it seems odd to me that they're supposed to be the traditional ones, but they hate the Pope. Aren't you supposed to, if you're traditional, aren't you supposed to think the Pope is infallible? I don't know. I take a lot of school groups to, like, basilicas and stuff, and I often have, like, a list of questions ready for the priest based on things that people have emailed me. And usually the answer is over and over, no, that is not Catholic dogma. No, that is not really Catholic dogma. Now, come on, Adam, you know this is not going to turn out to be. Oh yeah, the Ed and Lorraine Warren fans. That was a good example, in fact, Adam. They tend to be the Catholic adjacent type. Evening, Gene. Hey, Karen. Hey, Gina. Hey, Laura. Oh yeah, it's going to be nice and chilly on the boat tours, but there is like a below deck area where you can get out of the wind. And drinking is allowed. I saw David ask that like right before I signed off. Hey, Rebecca. Evening, everybody. We're going to let Benny Goodman play a little bit more because people tend to log on right at 8 o'clock. And give everybody a little bit of time to make sure everything's working okay. And Andy was great last night. I only got to catch about half of it. But yeah, she had quite a large numbers too, so we had to hop on and mod. We always want a moderator on when there's going to be that many people. You never know, especially like on effing Chicago, people might show up thinking that it's thinking that it's one of those let's all bash Chicago, let's all post police scanner feeds.
And they all loved it. They all loved
For sure next year, Judy.
By Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein. Rosetta.
Vibe with Thomas Aquinas. That I could kind of go with. I could dig that. We're going to let Benny Goodman do one more tune here. Then we'll get started properly. This is Benny live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. Emily up behind the cheddar curtain, up beyond Kenosha, where the cheese curds grow. Well, I'm glad we're already talking about next year. Richard, right on. We know what they mean when they say Chicago's a hellhole. We know what they mean. Sue, we'll try to live stream what we can of it. And Maria, I definitely got people in the chat who thought that Mandy's talk should just be a commercial for somebody else's podcast, or that she should just rehash whatever he's saying. Dana, that'd be awesome. Yeah, anybody else think that Darren Bailey looks like the principal of a segregated high school? He looks like he just crawled out of the National Lampoon's high school yearbook parody. But hey, let's move on. All right, we're going to give Benny Goodman is wrapping up this tune, and then it is time for us to start out properly. Well, this is the false ending. It fools me every time. All right, that is Benny Goodman coming to you live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago, coming to you live, displaced by about 85 years, but you know how it is. But all right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome along to Mysterious Chicago. I am Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out on the History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time, so I am incredibly famous, and you should definitely pay attention to whatever I say. So, among my books are Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. I'll do a big effing talk on H.H. Holmes in a couple of days, sometime during the busy season. More recent books include Murder Maps USA, new from Thames and Hudson. I've just lost myself there. Great. And the brand new Graceland Cemetery book, which came out through University of Illinois Press just over a month ago now, but having a lot of fun going out promoting this and telling all of these stories. And of course, we've got a lot of tours coming up. Just go to adamchicago.com for all of that stuff if you're new around here, but we've got tours all through October in person. Not to mention, upcoming soon, Mystericon with the boat tour and everything. So, all right, everybody, today we are going to do one of our neighborhood tours where I take us virtually around a neighborhood in Chicago and tell some of my favorite stories from there. In this case, we're not going to be talking about, like, the Rock and Roll McDonald's and the Rainforest Cafe, which mercifully is not there, which means I will never have to eat a school group meal there again. And also, that guy in the frog suit will never scare the bejesus out of me again. So, let's go ahead and get started. In fact, one of my favorite little obscure stories, one that I really fell down, I know everybody drinks when I say rabbit hole, but that's exactly what happened here, is there's this little empty space here. Well, there's the alley, 2 houses, and then a newer building. The newer building is replacing what used to be 6 East Huron. There's another shot of it, or 8 Huron. See, if I line it up here, this is the building that we're talking about, this older shot, but you can kind of see the left side of the dome there, and in the new picture, the right side of the dome. So most of the buildings nearby it were still there. But this one is now long gone. But as of the 1960s, there was a business operating out of this place at 8 East Huron, this neighborhood just above the Loop, called Finders Incorporated. The Finders Incorporated would find anything you needed. If you needed, like, a monkey who could play Monopoly, they would find it for you. or they would teach a monkey how to play Monopoly. If you needed a violin stuffed with hot dogs, they would find that for you. Whatever happened to come up, like what examples people gave is like they heard that there was some tradition about giving your husband to be a black bear tooth, so they managed to acquire a black bear tooth. Now this was all started as a day job by a guy by the name of Barry Ziggy Stone, shown here with Del Close, holding up the Finder's sign. These guys were both major players in the early growth of improv comedy in Chicago. Del Close especially, one of the founders of the Second City, the Improv Olympics. So it's kind of hard to tell reading up on this stuff exactly how serious they honestly were. Was they really finding everything for everyone, or was it really just kind of a comedy thing for the most part? But by all accounts, they did in fact have a violin stuffed with hot dogs, and a monkey who could play Monopoly. Now, I know how to get a monkey to play Monopoly. You just say, listen, monkey, getting $500 for landing on free parking is a house rule. Here we play by the official rules. You just have to lay down the law, you know. So Ziggy Stone was a guy who was known around Chicago as a prankster for the most part, just to begin with. He would organize like train trips for his friends where they would all dress up in bowler hats, and every stop they pulled in, he would get out and tell everybody a vote for Teddy Roosevelt is a vote for progress. This is about 45, 50 years after Teddy Roosevelt died. So there were a few things that they couldn't end up doing anything with. For one thing, they would have a catalog every year of all the stuff they couldn't sell, stuff that they had to buy in a lot and couldn't get rid of. Like this bust, they couldn't figure out who this mystery bust was. I have a sneaking suspicion myself. It could have been anybody from that era, but it looks very similar to the bust of Martin Ryerson that is inside of his tomb at Graceland that I'm not really supposed to show, so I'll just show it really quickly there. Also, yeah, there's so many people I have researched that could be, but it's probably just some businessman, probably some bank president or something. Now, I really wish I could get a hold of one of the Finder's catalogs. I actually went so far as to get Ziggy Stone on the phone a while back when I first discovered this. I found his phone number out in San Francisco where he's been living for years, and got him on the phone, and he said he still had a couple of the catalogs somewhere in storage, but I got the impression that he thought I was really from the IRS or something, and he's, I sold the business years and years ago. So if anybody's getting sued over it these days, it's not going to be him. But we'll move on a little bit from there. Just down the block is St. James. Now, this is a church with a bit of a claim to fame. Abraham Lincoln went to a church service here, and Lincoln was generally not a church-going man. Now, Lincoln, right after his election as president, though, he figured he could use all the help he could get. So during a stop in Chicago where he came to meet his vice president, Hannibal Hamlin, he decided to take in services here. Now, for the most part, this is not the original building. Most of it was wrecked in the Great Chicago Fire, but parts of the tower, parts of the building are still original. And then if you go to the inside of the place, just on the inside is the Civil War memorial that was left over. This was a brand new addition to the church when the Great Chicago Fire happened. It was a little further in, part of the altar. But this is a memorial showing all the names of members of the church who had been killed in the Civil War, and there were quite a few of them. See it all over several plaques, plus the Gettysburg Address is in there. Now, among those names on the wall is one of the guys who was on my Graceland tour quite often, Colonel Lucius Larrabee. This guy had been a member of the drill team, the Zouaves. They had strict codes of conduct. They fancied themselves really tough guys, so when he needed a finger amputated, he waved off the card of anesthesia and said, "No, just cut it off." So they did. And I think the exact words going through his head as it happened were, "I've made a huge mistake." But he managed to sit very still while they cut his finger off, then had a long pause and said, "All right, next time I will get the ether." That's a little bit of old pre-fire Chicago that is still around today. You occasionally hear that the tower up here, did I get enough of the shot to see it? No. The tower's got all these black marks on it that are said to be scorch marks from the Great Chicago Fire, but I've seen pictures of it from right after the fire, and the scorch marks are not really present on it at the time. So it's one of those things we don't necessarily know for sure. Yeah, Lucius Larrabee was a good-looking guy. Joseph Scott, the other member of the Zouaves who's at Graceland, or one of them, also was a really handsome guy. I gotta say, you look at the pictures of these guys, you can see why women went screaming for them. Hi to all of you just joining us. This is the Ransom Cable Mansion, Ransom Cable was president of the Rock Island and Pacific Railroad. Actually got Congress to authorize a new bridge over the Mississippi from Davenport to Rock Island. So the reason we have the Quad Cities is because of this. So this is what they build for you when you create the Quad Cities. Before that, the cities being separated, they weren't really four of a kind yet. And I'm never really one to acknowledge railroad presidents. Yeah, he got the bridge built. If he hadn't, somebody else would have. Come on. But Ransom Cable, railroad president. This gorgeous building and lovely garden out back. All designed by Henry Ives Cobb. Now, for years, this was owned by Richard Dreyhouse. I remember the first time I was doing this tour, I found out during the tour that he had died that day, or that day or the day before. He was an investor and philanthropist. His firm, instead of the usual buy low and sell high, their idea was what they called momentum buying, which is the basic philosophy is if a stock is low, there's probably a reason for it. Their idea was to buy high and sell higher. Which worked. He had several mansions that looked like this one. They're now working on a mausoleum for him over at Graceland Cemetery. It's going to take a little while. There weren't any plans for it. And frankly, I imagine he would have loved planning his own mausoleum. He seems like that guy. This is the kind of guy who had threw giant parties for his birthday. Like the public loved him up in Lake Forest. But he like threw a James Bond themed birthday party for himself when he was like 72. But I just talked to a person who knew him lately. He said, yeah, they weren't really prepared for the death because it wasn't really clear to Richard that he was going to die. And I don't mean that he was going to die that year. It's just, in general, Richard seemed not to know that he was going to die. Let's walk around the side of it a little bit and just check this out. A couple of shots of the garden back here. I don't know how much of this is original and how much of this Richard added himself. It's the kind of thing he would do. In fact, right across the corner from it is the museum that bears his name, the Dreyhouse Museum, which he's taken one of these old Gilded Age mansions that used to be very common in River North. This is where a lot of the rich people lived, just over the river from the hustle and bustle of the Loop. Here at Erie and Wabash is one that was originally the Samuel Nickerson Mansion. Samuel Nickerson was this guy. And later it was owned by Lucius Fisher, who comes up a lot in the Graceland tours too. He was the namesake of the Fisher building that the Burnham Company built, designed by Charles Bowler Atwood for the Burnham Company, and now has this cool mausoleum over at Graceland. This is actually a small mausoleum. It's all ashes inside, but underneath that angel's sleeve is a keyhole, so it can be opened up, and inside are all of the ashes. Well, we'll take a quick look at Mr. Nickerson's house. This is how it looked at the time. And this is how they've got it restored. I think that's very nice. Very well done. So it gives us how you might live if you were a banker back in the 1880s. This is from 1883. Now right next to it, I'll take him down. So you can see the building next to it is the old College of Surgeons from back in the olden days. It looked exactly like the Iroquois Theater. One of the ghost tour companies I worked for was like deeply involved in trying to come up with a ghost story for this place. And not necessarily to find one so much as to make one up. Because it looks exactly like the Iroquois Theater, which is famously haunted, and we could at least go by it. Now, there is a ghost story related to it. It was one that I couldn't really get too much talk out of at the time. But this was a place, there was an old Tribune article about this place having dead bodies delivered to it. And they would talk about hearing the sound of the bodies, the clip-clop of the carriages bringing them. How they knew that this was a carriage bringing a dead body is kind of anybody's guess. But it was actually not too clear in the article which building they were talking about. They said that it was on Wells Street. They probably meant the old College of Surgeons. But it also could have been a little bit further down. This is a little bit, this is a story that I ran into anyway, when looking up dead bodies being stashed on Wells Street or delivered to Wells Street. You've got this building over here now, the Flair House, built in 1883 by Marcus Devine. He was a milk dealer. Sold in 1964 to an advertising agency for $20,000. Can't even imagine what this place would go for right now, right there in River North. If you really want to live in River North, the dude bro capital of Chicago. But right next to it, as you have noticed already, now there were a few stories here, but more of the stories are really in the alley. Right next to it is the Hooters, which is long claimed to be haunted. Now, the stories go that people hear voices down in the basement, people feel taps on their shoulders, and for a long time they couldn't really come up with a story about why it would be haunted, other than vague, we think the mob had meetings here, or it is right in the path of the Great Chicago Fire. But while I was digging around, I found a little story about the alley, back before there was a porta potty there. There was, for one thing, there was a story about a woman being found frozen to death there. But moreover, there was a barn right here where body snatchers used to stash their victims until they could be shipped to Ann Arbor or Iowa City. Chicago had made a rule saying that all the medical schools would get all the bodies they needed. So the idea was that they would cut off grave robbers from their income and stop body snatching in Chicago. I just posted a thing on Twitter the other day, a headline saying, "Body snatchers can no longer make a living in Chicago." Hold my beer. The thing is, there was still enough of a market for cadavers up in Chicago, up in Ann Arbor and Iowa City, that you could still steal bodies here. Then they would put them into barrels labeled kerosene or something and send them off like that. Until one day they found all of the bodies being shipped here, including one that they went on and on about what a beautiful naked woman she was. They would go on and on about that when they were talking about dead bodies. They would never do it for living people, but live ones, sure, that was okay. Dead ones, that was okay. I once went out here, Wait, Don't Tell Me took me out here to the alley, but they really wanted me to be more of a nut. They kept saying things like, "Who's with us right now?" I'd be like, well, hell, I don't know. Jeez. I never claimed to have any more psychic powers than stuff that's growing in my fridge. Let's move over onto Dearborn Street. Speaking of psychics, well, here we've got 650 Dearborn. Which is supposedly by Lars Hallberg. Doesn't really look like his style to me. He's got a couple houses in the Gold Coast and, of course, the old coffee warehouse that's right across from the Merchandise Mart on the river tours. But supposedly it's by him. Now, back in the old days, it was the Hotel Raleigh. We're going to move over to the side a little bit here. Just beside the Hotel Raleigh is a psychic. You got to have a psychic. But here at 642 Dearborn, also, this is a current building, is from 1880, but a couple of years before that, on the same site, there was an office. This is before the Hotel Raleigh. How much that place cost? $3.50 to $8 a week. 5 minutes to the Loop. But there was also a lawyer's office operating out of this place at 642. The lawyer was not really a lawyer. He had cheated his way through the bar exam as part of one of his many schemes. He had already been a fake politician. He had been a member of a free love cult for a while. But it was a guy by the name of Charles Guiteau. And having gotten into politics, he decided that President Garfield ought to make him corporation counsel. No, Consul of Paris. But in any case, he was not remotely qualified for it. He was just a crank, so when he didn't get the job, he got his revenge by assassinating President Garfield. There's the thing, Garfield's tomb is over at Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland. It's really a very nice tomb. They've got this fresco of Garfield on his deathbed being attended to by the physicians trying to get the bullet out. They were trying to get the bullet out, but they kept poking him in the liver instead. At his trial, Guiteau would say, "I did not kill James Garfield, the doctors did." Which is a fair point. The doctors kept poking him in the liver. Alexander Graham Bell, the telephone inventor, showed up with a metal detecting device, but it got kind of screwed up by the fact that it was a metal bed. But down in the tomb, they've got one of my favorite pieces of memorabilia, Garfield brand laxative tea. You got to ask yourself, when you die, next to your sarcophagus, will there be a memorabilia case with a diarrhea tea with your face on the box? And if not, what can you do to remedy this situation? But Charles Guiteau was a Chicagoan. There was one of the headlines after, "The Scoundrel, a Chicagoan." He was eventually hanged. On his scaffold, he sang a song called "I Am Going to the Lordy," which was absolutely bad. We'll move down a little bit here. To the old Chicago Historical Society building. And this was designed by Henry Ives Cobb, who did a lot of the buildings that we talk about around here. It's in a style that we would call Richardsonian Romanesque. It's like something Henry Hobbs and Richard Woodson would have done. But this one, a lot of the great ones that look like that are actually built by Henry Ives Cobb. Just kind of aping the style. But this was originally built to be the Chicago Historical Society's museum. And at the time, they had a wide hodgepodge of stuff, like one of George Washington's coats was up there. But if you turn to the left from George Washington's coats, you would find some bones, all in a nice display case. These were thought to be the bones of an early settler named John Lalime. We talk about John Kinsey now and then. John Kinsey probably committed Chicago's first murder when he killed a rival by the name of John Lalime. His body was buried over by a church. Originally, it was at his house, then a church grew up around it. Then, after the Great Chicago Fire, people just kind of lost track of it. But 20 years later, some construction guys were doing some work over at Illinois and Wabash about the place where the Jazz Record Mart would eventually be. And while they were digging, they found some bones. And for a while, they were just playing with it, like kids were playing soccer with the skull or something. It would have been like kick the can or kick the skull at the time. But somebody who came by and said, wait a minute, I'm pretty sure there used to be a grave there. Everybody here. And he kind of gathered the bones up in a box, took them to the Chicago Historical Society, who of course were absolutely thrilled, and presented them to them as possibly the bones of Jean Lalime. They compared notes and decided, yeah, these are probably those bones. And the Chicago Historical Society actually still has them to this day. Now, this was the Excalibur Club for a while. They had a ghost tour thing that they would talk about. The place was definitely said to be haunted. Problem is, they could never quite get a straight story about why it was haunted. The most common story was that all of the bodies of the Eastland disaster were taken to this place and it was used as a morgue. That has no basis in fact. I think what probably happened was people saw pictures of the bodies and it said courtesy of Chicago Historical Society, and they thought that was where the picture was taken, not who provided the photo. But their other one was they say that the bones of Jean Lalime were here until they were destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire. The timeline of which is all wrong. In fact, the bones are not destroyed. They are still in holding by the Chicago Historical Society now. They're not kept in the museum. They are kept off-site, in off-site storage. They do bring them in occasionally. Let's move over around the road a bit. Another guy who comes up occasionally is Judge Lambert Tree is at Graceland Cemetery. He had a long story about running away from the Great Chicago Fire. This place was built on the site of his father-in-law's old place, H.H. McGee, which became kind of a gathering place during the Great Chicago Fire. At the time, it wasn't this building, it was a little house plus a large yard, and a lot of people thought, ooh, big yard, the fire won't get this place, we can stash all of our valuables there. So a whole bunch of people crammed into this place, including Judge Lambert Tree himself. But then the building did, in fact, catch fire, and everybody had to flee. And that's kind of how most Great Chicago Fire stories go. They would get about 2 blocks north and say, okay, now we're safe. And then a few hours later, they'd have to move again. And then they'd say, okay, now we're safe, 2 blocks away. This happened just over and over again. But eventually the house was destroyed in the fire. After H.H. McGee's death, his son-in-law, Judge Lambert Tree, and his wife came into the property. So they decided to build an artist colony here. So what they built was called Tree Studios, and this was just a place for artists to live and hang out, to live and to work. Move up just a bit here. You can still see, it's all gone into things like condos and stuff now and shops, but moving up, you can still see it still says studio building. And this was originally the tomb of H.H. McGee, but Judge Tree sold it to the Stevens family, had everybody hauled out and reburied, so I would be haunting the crap out of that kid. But here's some of the artists who are hanging around here. Mrs. Sargent, Mrs. Cameron, Julia Bracken went on to do a lot of good stuff, too. Now, at one point, somebody left a baby on the doorstep of this place. And they thought, wow, can we keep him? And they gave the baby the name Rembrandt, and the idea at first was they were going to raise him up in the studio. They were going to raise him to be an artist. Now, eventually, they gave him a more proper name of James Vincent Whistler. And exactly whatever happened to him, I don't really know. I know that eventually somebody adopted the baby. It wasn't one of the artists. They didn't just raise it in the studio after all. But whatever happened to baby Rembrandt is one of those mysteries we'll probably never solve. Well, let's move around the corner from here. Tell you one guy who probably would have hated living next to all those artists. Right down the block is Leander Hamilton McCormick. This is what was once Lowry's Steakhouse, was the wreck of the old McCormick mansion. It looked like this at the time. It was built for Leander, one of the nephews of Cyrus McCormick. The first generation of McCormicks to come here, William, Leander, and Cyrus, all hated each other's guts, and they were right to do so. Cyrus claimed he had invented the mechanical reaper. Robert and William said that Leander and William said, no, our father invented it. You're just taking all of the credit. You were supposed to cut us in equally, but you're only giving us like 20% shares. I really can't stand those guys. They couldn't stand each other either. Well, I like them less because, William quit going to church because of all the abolitionist sermons. They were still enslaving people at the time, back at their place down in Virginia. But this is how the mansion looked at one point, and now you can see they've cut most of it off. So this is Leander Hamilton McCormick. And you can see a little bit of the original over here. For a while, there was a restaurant there that had the Kungsholm Puppet Theater on the inside. So in addition to going in for lunch, you could go see a puppet opera. Now, Lowry's just closed down. They said a while ago that they were closing because they thought they just couldn't stand the thought of another Black Lives Matter protest in the city, which is almost like the ghost of Leander Hamilton McCormick rearing his head. He wrote a book called Characterology, an Exact Science, which expanded on phrenology, the idea that you could look at the bumps and ridges of people's heads and know exactly what kind of person they were. He expanded it to include things like skin color. You can probably guess where the little prick was going with that. Let's just go around the corner from him. Now, a lot of people thought stuff like that back then, but not everybody tried to make a living out of it. But this is one of the other, this is his father's mansion, Leander McCormick, who was a good buddy of Robert E. Lee. And here he is looking all sad. Oh, did you lose the war? He very openly wanted the Confederacy to win. Well, you got this sign over here, the plaque on it, the McCormick Double House, which you can see on it says the neighborhood, there were so many McCormicks there that people called it McCormickville. You see this in a lot of history books. What you don't see it in is anything written during that time period. Nobody really called this place McCormickville in the 1870s. It was a term that people said they might as well have called it 50 years later. And then people just kind of decided that they actually did. This happens a lot with like old school neighborhood names, like Beer Baron Row in Wicker Park. You'll never find a reference to that being called Beer Baron Row till like the 1990s or something. Let's move over down the block a little ways. Let's get out of McCormickville. Those guys were jerks. On second thought, let us not go to McCormickville. It is a silly place. Still, we'll go check out the McGoverns, the Liberty Inn, currently the Kerryman. Well, this one goes way back to when it was McGovern's Liberty Inn back in the 1910s and 1920s. Now, this was known as a kind of a rough place. Dean O'Banion, future head of the North Side Mob, got his start as a singing waiter at this place. And sometimes they would advertise it like it was a family place. This is a later Christmas thing. Merry Christmas and a joyous New Year. McGovern's Liberty Inn. It's an institution. It's a nice way of putting it. And, well, here were their matchbooks a few years before. Incidentally, last week on the Patreon, we talked about Frances Carrick, the trans woman who was accused of murder in 1923. She had actually sung as a cabaret singer at the McGovern brothers' place. There's a few other other matchsticks. Gives you a pretty good idea what kind of place this was. Here's Dean O'Banion, head of the North Side Mob. And I really thought, the story about Dean O'Banion being a singing waiter here was going to be tough to verify. But right after his death, people were telling stories about it. He was a singing waiter at the place, and he sang well. He had been a choir boy at Holy Name. Sure he was. But everybody remembers when Eugene Geary came in here and demanded that somebody sing My Wild Irish Rose. O'Banion was able to not only to sing, but able to weasel his way into the mob. You don't usually get to become a mobster by starting out as a singing waiter. He had also been a newspaper slugger, according to legend. But in the 1980s, they renamed the place O'Banion's, and for a while it was a punk club in the early 80s, one of the first punk clubs in Chicago. At the time, everybody was being told that Dean O'Banion was shot in the place. That was a few blocks away. It was just where he had been a singing waiter. Now, Kristen, I don't want Facebook getting on me. We'll move down over to Wells Street again, heading up in the northern edge. We got Prosico. I mean, the mobsters did in fact tend to get killed, so it was good of them to have, right on the left here, their own funeral home. There was a place called Sparbaro's Funeral Home. Mr. Sparbaro was not only, John Sparbaro's was not only a funeral director and an assistant state's attorney, he was also a racketeer and a bootlegger. He was the prosecutor in the Leopold and Loeb case, which, you know, a guy who can help send people to their death by hanging, which he at least tried to do with Leopold and Loeb, only makes sense to have an appropriate business for the side business. This is Dean O'Banion's funeral. You can actually see the building here pretty well, and you can see the white one there. This is Sparbaro & Co. You can also look and see that it's the same building right here. They've redone the windows and stuff, but it's the same one. So mob funerals tended to be a really big affair. This is the one for Dean O'Banion. This is for one of his gangsters, Vinny the Schemer Drucci. Now, if you look really close on the wall there, you can see that sconce, that ornamentation up on the post, that oval-shaped thing. Those are still there. Now, the business, of course, has not really been a funeral home in a long time. Well, there's John Sparbaro. At one point, people got kind of figured out about the guy after the place got bombed. Now, they thought they were just bombing him because he was a judge and he was out to get somebody and he was going up against the mob. But really, it turned out, once they did the investigating, that there was some racketeering going on the side. The guy also happened to have a bit of a bootlegging thing going. We'll move up just a little bit closer and get another look at those sconces. And just up the road from this is one of the great Chicago stories, I think. Just around the corner, at 731 North Wells, in the 1970s, 4 reporters for the Chicago Sun-Times started up a bar of their own called The Mirage. The name perhaps should have been a clue. But these reporters set up this place acting like they were just opening a regular bar, just like any ordinary citizens. But really, they were trying to find out how many people would ask them for bribes. Just how corrupt were the city officials around here. Here's a shot of them in color. Now, they walked around and found that there were leaks everywhere, fire hazards galore. But the here's a picture of the fire inspector walking around smoking a cigarette and accepting a $10 bribe to sign it off. They said that people kind of worked on the supermarket scheme here. They didn't have to pay people off much. People just kind of worked on volume. You know, low price, high volume. Eventually, they put out this giant expose where they figured out that there were all kinds of tax cheats going on. There were all kinds of fraud going on, all kinds of payoffs. And eventually this led to quite a lot of reform. You can't get away with nearly this much stuff now. I'm not saying people don't take bribes in this city anymore because, you know, just like every other city they do. But it's a lot harder now than it was back then. I forget what the story there was. Also, I've covered this story I don't know how many times, but I always want an excuse to tell the Lily and Collie story. We're just about getting to the Magnificent Mile here, really. We're right where the Under Armour store is now. Stood the Wind Blue Inn, run by this teenage flapper, Lillian Collie. Now, Lillian Collie was raided all the time partly because she was serving booze under the table, but mostly because he was hosting petting parties, make-out parties. She had to go in front of a judge and say, "Your Honor, I solemnly swear there is no snuggle pupping at the Wind Blue Inn." Now, later on, she became an author. This is her with Vincent Starr, the Sherlock Holmes expert at Marshall Fields, when they were doing an autographing party for a book that they had both contributed to, all about Chicago murders, that came out in 1940. And here she is in the 1970s. I've covered her many times, so that's just a very, very quick one. There's an entire tour based on her. I'll go over really quickly to another Henry Ives Cobb joint. Well, this is an old building that was built for a varnish company in what was called the Dutch Revival style. Kind of a postmodern take on old school Dutch style art. Here's a picture of it from back when it was a varnish company in the 1950s. Now, today it is Harry Carey's restaurant, but at one time in the 1920s, it was owned by Frank the Enforcer Nitti. Now, they've actually found, down in the basement, they found a couple of hidden rooms and a couple of hidden books. It's hard to know how seriously to take this because they've been using it to attract tourists the whole time. But down in the basement, there's a whole place that they call Nitti's Vault. Loop around the corner to the courthouse. Now, this was, I can connect, when I take people to the courthouse, I don't even know which story to tell. One of them that I could tell was also the jail was right behind this. And inside of the courthouse, they've got a big portrait of terrible Tommy O'Connor, who was sentenced to be hanged for murder in 1921, but then he escaped. He and a few other prisoners broke out of jail and was never found. For years, any reporter who wanted a day off could just call and say, I got a hot tip on terrible Tommy O'Connor. I got to follow this one up. Everybody used that to get a day off occasionally. They had to keep the gallows in the basement for years because the sentence said he must hang by the neck until dead. So even in the 1920s, 50 years after they'd gotten rid of the hangings, the sentence still said that. So if they ever caught him, by God, they were going to hang him. Now, incidentally, the Wind Blew In, Lillian's place, was torched, allegedly by Virginia Harrison, who had been her business partner and possibly girlfriend. Later on, she was found to be running a bank robbing organization. She was kind of the brains of the operation of these three guys who robbed places, one of whom had been one of the prisoners who broke out along with terrible Tommy O'Connor. You can also mention Johann Hawk was there. Al Capone was never put on trial here, but he took a couple of meetings with lawyers here, so this is one place still standing that we can trace him to. Yeah, I never even know which story to tell people. And right across the street from it is one particular relic of the era of the 1970s. In the 1970s, the area around Clark and Grand was known as one of the major gay districts. There's a museum up here in Rogers Park, the Leather Archives, that has some of the artwork that was on the walls there. A lot of like wizards with mustaches. And then right across the street, somehow still in operation, is TJ's Adult Bookstore. Even like 15, 20 years ago when I was doing ghost tours, there were a lot more businesses like this still functioning up in River North. This is about the only one I can still think of now. Offhand. Not like I really go looking for them too much, though. Too much. But all right, I want to go ahead and quick plug some upcoming events here. Most notably, coming up very soon, we have got Mystericon 2022. That is just 8 days away from today, and hence I haven't figured out what my parents' flying-in schedule is, so I'm not totally sure how easy it'll be for me to do a tour next Thursday. So until I get that figured out, I'm not going to list next Thursday night's tour, but for those of you new around here, we do something like this every Thursday night and just about every Sunday morning as well. I don't usually announce the Sunday ones these days until morning of, and sometimes it's just like the stuff that I know never get great numbers anyway, like Silent Film in Chicago, The Shooting Showgirl, stuff that I love talking about, but they just never really quite bring in the numbers that the good Thursday stuff does. But Mystericon 2022, if you join, there's a group on Facebook called Mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles Fan Club. Miles is the cat. I gotta find him in a second here. He appears on every episode. But if you go there, you can find a link to all of the tours that are going on. I'll be doing stuff. Mandy's going to be doing stuff. The whole effing Chicago crew is going to be doing stuff. Lots of stuff happening. And with that, everybody, we will just put the Benny Goodman back on and hang out like we always do. So thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago, and here's Benny. Hey, Jason, that's a cool way to watch. I'll see you tomorrow. Hey, Miles. There you are. Did you hear your neighbor or what, buddy? I don't recall hearing much big band around the house when I was a kid. Oh, don't step on Bluesman DVD. There's this guy who hangs out at Sheridan and Broadway panhandling, always wearing like pinstripe suit and fedoras and stuff. Today he remembered me that I remembered his name last time, Larry Bluesman Drake, so he gave me a DVD. I haven't played it yet. I know this is going to be his blues stuff, though. Good night, Nedra, on YouTube. Thanks, Katie. My parents' taste in jazz tended more towards Kenny G. Oh, hey, Midwest. Urban Explorer, okay. Midwest Flesh. Hey, Rodney. Hey, Marine. Hey, thanks, everybody. Miles is 3, Paula. Hanging out on the desk here. Oh yeah, Kathleen, I did do an episode of Betrayed. I was just a talking head. I didn't really know much about the case, honestly. It was just an acting gig, really. Plymouth, Michigan. Kate, I don't know much about Plymouth, Michigan. Offhand. Thank you, Ann. Oh, you arrive at 1. I'd be able to do a tour on that night, then. That shouldn't be a problem. Katie, Priya's around here someplace. She's probably with Ronnie in the bedroom right now. Thanks, Andrea. The same email address for Zelle works with the PayPal.
Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
Yes, Bill, I'll wear a jacket. Jan, I might have missed a question there. Okay, Ben, Josh, I'm imagining you're probably a bot. You sound like a bot, but if you start saying that to a lot of people, Now and then, we've had this on effing Chicago, we've had it here as well, people saying, hey, why aren't we friends? You should send me a friend request. It's like the same message over and over. Sarah, yeah, last year, one of my silent film book was one of his textbooks, one of my kids' textbooks in college. I love it when they teach me in places I couldn't have gotten into. So. Jen, yeah, that is the plan. We probably will do a public Find a Grave Friday next week as well. And it'll probably be at Mount Olivet again. That's my plan. Thanks, Gregory. Oh, Erica, glad to have you. Always glad to have new people here. We do this every week.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about it. Trucking.
Oh, no, there won't be a midday tour. next Friday. There'll be the Find a Grave Friday, which is what I had my parents on last time. And then I gotta relax and get ready for some boat tours and get everything set up. Good night, Angie. Thanks for coming out. I'm impressed with myself that I still have any voice today. I spent the afternoon at a recording studio, laying down 8 songs worth of vocals for this album. This has been my art project for the month before I get started on the Johann Hawk book. Vicky, thank you. Across the street from the old Rainbow Roller Rink? Yeah, that would be St. Boniface. I haven't done a full tour of St. Boniface. We've done a lot of Find a Grave Fridays there. Most recently, Paul Dresser. That was such a great story. The guy who the Chicago Defender said wrote the first blues song in 1914. And if it had been a white newspaper calling this guy the writer of the first blues song, we would have all just had a laugh and moved on, but it turned out to be a wild story. Paul Dresser never sold his soul at the Crossroads, but it's only because nobody told him that was an option. Where was the stone quarry for all the mansions? That I don't know, Carol. There have been a few Find a Graves there. There was one of the first 2 victims of Henry Meyer, the early serial killer. There was that bugler from the Civil War that we found there. That was a tricky one. Remember, Mandy was out there with us. A couple of baseball players there. There's a grave robbing victim that I couldn't find. It's been like renumbered since then. A lot of the stone came from Joliet, but also like the couch tomb, I know they got it from all the way out in New York.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
It was kind of a big deal to have your stone imported from someplace. Any Muppet graves? I hope not. I mean, Muppets get blow up or eat each other all the time, and they're still around for the next sketch, so... Alright, no angry messages from people who couldn't find us on here. I was impressed. We only got one message from someone who couldn't seem to get onto the stream last night for Mandy's thing, and it was a lot of new people. Usually, in the old days, I would figure that for every 100 people watching, I'd get one angry email from someone saying, I couldn't get on, I couldn't log in, and I was in a chat room full of other people who couldn't. I've never found out where this chat room was. But... usually it's because they didn't read the instructions. And, you know, a lot of people's instinct when something isn't working is not to read the instructions, it's to complain to the manager. No, Octavio, Cookie Monster is known for 30 years now that cookies are a sometimes food. Not an all-the-time food.
cabin room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra, and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo.
Thanks, Laura. Now, this is a copy of one of the John Lennon outfits from Get Back. I was at the recording studio today, so I thought I should dress the part. That sounds like a Keaton story, Kristen. Hear it everywhere you go, any time of day. Thanks for everybody who's been still hitting the donation button. Bill, I get them online. Well, Kristen, when I'm working on the laptop, I can see a little bit longer comments. Gene, do I know who I'll be looking for tomorrow? Nope. I haven't been working too far ahead this week.
And we'll let the title speak for itself. Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
I'll tell you guys, my great triumph today is I finally got the little popcorn kernel husk that was stuck in my gums. It had been stuck for several days now. And when I got it out, I found out there were actually 2 of them. But I got them. The grave of Seymour Butts, it's kind of near IP Freely. Also that great duo Willie Make It and Betty Don't. Miles is giving us a stretch down here. Give it a stretch, Miles. That's a good stretch. See you, Mr. Donna. Well, if I could go show off for us here. Kathleen, yeah, he likes his belly scratched. He's not really a cuddler for the most part. Not yet. He likes to be petted, but doesn't like to have to sit still very much. But he'll get there. Hey, Miles.
And here's a short encore portion of Benny Goodman's forthright invitation at the beginning of his program. Let's dance.
All right, we'll let Benny wrap up here. Here he comes. Oh, right behind him, here's Priya. Wanted to come in and say hello. Thanks, Leemund. Now, Priya is getting more and more cuddly. She loves to jump up on us. But all right, that's Benny wrapping up. I will pick out a tour to do next week shortly. Or maybe I'll let my parents pick which one they want. That'd be nice. That'd be a nice gesture, since they will be here. And with that, everybody, tomorrow morning is Find a Grave Friday. If you're new here, every Friday I go to a cemetery where I know a particular person is buried, but I don't look up what the headstone looks like or anything like that. We figure out where it is in the chat and play hot and cold until I find it. Sometimes it can take a long time, sometimes it's only a few minutes, but there's always a cool story attached to it as well. So that'll be tomorrow, 10 o'clock here on the Mysterious Chicago Facebook page. When I'm working remote, I can only work on the Facebook. But thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I will see you, many of you, in the morning, and quite a few of you next week at Mystericon. Until then, everybody, try to stay warm, but mostly, stay spooky, everybody.